So hello everyone and welcome to the National Efforts Breakout session. I'm Charlie McCrudden and I'll be the moderator for this session. So as a reminder, this session is going to highlight cross-sectoral energy efficiency policies and best practices from Germany and China. And it's also going to provide an overview of the energy efficiency's role in phasing out refrigerants. Attendees should feel free to ask questions throughout our discussion via the chat, and I'll be monitoring that. And we'll get to them at the end of the presentation during the Q&A portion. And so questions can be posed to all three presenters at that time. So now I'd like to introduce our distinguished panel. First up, we have Dr. Barbara Schloman. Dr. Schloman is an energy economist. She is head of the business unit energy policy at the Fraunhofer Institute for Systems and Innovation Research, ISI, in Germany. Her current research focus is on the design and evaluation of energy and climate policies and the monitoring of energy and climate targets. Dr. Schloman has been a board member of the European Council for an Energy Efficient Economy since 2011 and has been a member of the Council of Experts on Climate Change since 2020. So please take it away, Barbara.
Hello to everyone, good morning, good afternoon. I'm very glad to present now some of the efforts in Germany to reduce energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. And these efforts, I would say, are the efforts which are behind the position of Germany in the ACEEE scorecard, as you have seen in the first presentation. Next slide. I would like to start my presentation with a look at the energy efficiency progress in Germany since 2000. And here in the slide, it's measured by the so-called energy efficiency index ODEX, which is calculated within the Odyssey database, both for Germany and for all other EU member states. And it represents better the pure trend in energy efficiency, because it's a measurement which is already clean from structural changes, for example, and other factors, for example, temperature, which are not directly related to energy efficiency. And as you can see here in Germany, as it was also seen in France, in the session before, the overall progress of energy efficiency decreased during the last decade. In Germany, it was very visible in industry already since 2008. And also you can see here a stagnation of energy efficiency in the transport sector and in the household sectors, which means, well, that looking at the statistical development, which is also influenced by the policies in our country and also at the EU level, does not proceed in a direction which we wish for energy efficiency as one of the most important drivers also of a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. What you can see here is a view on the milestones of the German energy transition, the so-called Energiewende, in the period 2010 to 2018. And this is the period, the decisions taken up in this period are those which had an impact both on the energy efficiency progress I showed before, and also for the results of the ACEEE scorecard, which was shown before. And well, the most with regard to measures, the most important milestone, I would say, were the new programs, or at that time new programs to achieve 2020 energy efficiency and climate targets in Germany from December 2014. These policies which were introduced there were relevant for the development, I would say, during the last 7-8 years in Germany. There was a first national action plan on energy efficiency, and also a first action also an action program on climate, which included a lot of policies in Germany. It was mainly funding programs in the different sectors, and also some regulatory measures. With regard to the development until 2030, and also the long-term development until 2050, the most important action during that period was a climate action plan 2050, which for the first time also included a non-binding greenhouse gas emission reduction targets for 2030 by sector. At that time, they were not mandatory. Well, that was the first, as you can say, the first period of the German energy transition, and part of that was also the decision on a phase out of nuclear energy already in March 2011. Which should be finalized until end of this year. And at the moment, you may imagine that this is discussed in Germany a lot, but at the moment it does not look like that this phase out will not fully take place until the end of the year. Well, the next period of this Energiewende policies started with the previous government of Germany, the last one under Chancellor Angela Merkel, in 2018, because there were a lot of more ambitious energy efficiency and climate policies announced, because it was clear at that time that the targets for 2030, which were decided in this climate action plan, could not be achieved with the policies in place at that time. Next slide. But as you can see here, that our previous government needed almost 2 years to put these action into place, which means that 2019 was a very important year for Germany with regard to new and more ambitious energy efficiency policies and also targets. First of all, a large climate action program was decided with a lot of policies in order to achieve the climate targets and energy efficiency targets, both from the European level and at the national level. And these energy efficiency measures were in that program, which are still in place in Germany, they covered all sectors. And for buildings, for example, we had a very huge funding program for efficient buildings, and also for building refurbishment, as well as tax incentives for the first time in Germany for building renovation, and also a new some changes in the Buildings Act, and also for industry. There was especially a large funding program for energy efficiency, renewable heat, and some other programs for the decarbonization of the energy intensive industry. In transport, the main focus until now was on funding and support for electric mobility. And what was, I would say, the most important policy in Germany, and which was also a change compared to previous periods, where we mainly had regulation and also funding programs, was a new pricing system for greenhouse gas emission emissions, which is in the first period starting from 2021 a CO2 price, which will increase during the next years every year. And up to now, it is planned that from 2026 or 2027, this will be a full emission trading scheme for transport and building sectors. That is for those two sectors which are not part of the European emission trading scheme, which only covers the energy sector and large parts of industry. Therefore, that was really a substantial change in energy policy and climate policy in Germany, which took place in this very important milestone year, 2019. It was already said before that not only national policies are important for the EU member states, but that also from European actions, there's a lot of impact on the development of energy efficiency and greenhouse gas emissions. At the European level, it was the European Green Deal, which was announced in December 2019, and which included a tightened energy efficiency target, which means a decrease of around 1/3 until 2030 is planned, and also the implementation of the energy efficiency first principle as a guiding principle for energy, for actions in the field of energy policy, which plays, I would say, a very important role. And at the European level, it's now the Fit for 55 package, which was announced in summer 2021, which will also have a big impact on Germany, because it includes partly a substantial revision of all relevant EU directives for energy efficiency and climate actions, which is most important, the Energy Efficiency Directive, and also the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, but also emission trading scheme, and the effort sharing regulation, which covers emissions outside outside industry and the energy sector, where that's a lot of action at the European level. And the final decision on these revisions is expected in the course of 2022. And the year 2022 is also a very important year, as it is seen here for Germany, because in Germany we now have a new government which started working in December in December 2021, and the coalition agreement of that government already included the announcement of a lot of new climate and energy efficiency measures. And the planning was that they did not want to wait 2 years to implement these policies, because the urgency to have a more ambitious policy became more and more clear. And it was also more and more clear that the ambitious energy climate targets, which are part of the new Federal Climate Change Act, which was adopted also in the end of 2019, could not be reached, even not with the policies put in place in 2019, though even not with the new pricing system we now have for buildings and transport. And therefore, a large new measure package, the so-called Easter and summer package, was announced in Germany, and it will include a large number of new and enhanced energy and climate policy measures. Here, the slide on the right side, you see some of them. We will, as they are announced already in the coalition agreement, and we will have a new energy efficiency law in Germany for the first time. There will be a reduction of levies on electricity consumption to make electricity cheaper compared to fossil fuels, and also a lot of measures to expand to accelerate the expansion of renewable energies, but also again in the sector several more ambitious energy efficiency policies. And to see how quick this development is this time, today in Germany, the new government already adopted part of this program only a few hours ago. Today, part of this Easter program, which mainly includes measures to accelerate renewable energies, and the energy efficiency policies will follow later. Where the impact of all that, what I show here, cannot be seen in the ACEEE scorecard. It's clear, and I think we will see in the new energy efficiency scorecard of ACEEE in some years, if these plans, both from Germany and the EU, will really deliver the savings which are intended to deliver. Next slide. Well, here another quick look on the European Energy Efficiency Scoreboard, which was already presented by Didier Bosboeuf. It's similar, the method is very similar to the ACEEE scorecard, but it only includes members of the European Union and a few other countries, UK, Switzerland, Norway. And this ranking can be done only for the members of the European Union, as it was shown from Didier Bosboeuf, or also including other countries outside as Switzerland and UK. And on the whole, I think it really the results of the ACEEE scoreboard are confirmed by our results. With regard to France and Germany, we especially see that their policy efforts, which I showed here for Germany and which were presented by Didier for France, are the most important factor for the ranking. Here, with regard to policy, France ranks first, and Germany at least number 5, which is, however, it does not include the new policies which only started since 2019 in Germany. But you can also see, or you could also see that Germany, for example, does not rank very well with regard to the statistical energy efficiency indicators, that is the development of the ODEX, and also with regard to the level of energy efficiency. And I think some differences in our ranking can also be explained by some methodological differences. With regard to policy impact, it's especially that in the ACEEE scorecard, as it was said before, that policies have a weight of 60% in that ranking, and in the European scoreboard, it's only 1/3. That is, most of the development of this ranking is influenced by the statistical development of energy efficiency and not so much by policies. Therefore, that also explains why, for example, Germany has not such a high position here in this ranking as in the ACEEE scorecard. Last slide. Okay, some conclusions are based on that. As I already said, the overall good position of Germany in the ACEEE scorecard and also in the Odyssey Muir scoreboard is mainly due to very good scoring on energy efficiency policies. Nevertheless, policies must deliver savings and must not only be there. And as we can see in the development of energy efficiency in Germany, it's not so much the huge number of policies is not really reflected also in the energy efficiency progress, and also not in the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in many sectors. Therefore, at the moment, it's clear that the current policies are not sufficient to reach these ambitious, also national greenhouse gas emission targets for 2030 in Germany, and therefore much more effort is needed. And we can only hope that the Easter and summer package, which is now planned, will really be able to deliver these savings. With regard to energy efficiency, I think the energy efficiency first principle as a guiding principle both in Germany and in the EU is an important step, but up to now the concrete implementation is still lacking both in Germany but also in many other EU member states. What is very important from my point of view is that until end of 2021, we mainly had our energy efficiency and climate targets as the major driver for energy efficiency. And we now have also energy security, and in Germany also the urgent need to reduce imports from fossil fuels, especially from Russia, but also in general to reduce the large import dependency will be another very important driver for energy efficiency. And we already in Germany a first package of measures against to reduce especially gas imports was already announced also in March this year. And I think this also makes the topic of the so-called multiple benefits of energy efficiency much more important. These benefits which go beyond pure cost savings, but savings of energy costs, but which are also very important. That energy efficiency has a very important contribution, a positive contribution to increase energy security, and also for the reduction of imports from fossil fuels. Other of these benefits are health impacts, and especially the positive impacts on GDP and employment, which we already were shown in several studies. We are advertising these multiple benefits at the European level a lot, and I know that ACEEE is also working in that. Therefore, I think both energy efficiency first and multiple benefits of energy efficiency could be very, very important drivers to further improve energy efficiency, not only in Europe, but also in other areas of the world, as for example in the US. Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you, Dr. Schloman. Now we're going to hear from Dr. Nan Zhu. Dr. Zhu is a senior scientist and group leader of the China Energy Group of Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. She is also the technical program lead for the Net Zero World Action Center, an initiative launched by the US government to work with countries to implement their climate ambition pledges and accelerate transitions to net zero, resilient and inclusive energy systems. Dr. Zhu is a co-chair of the Academic Advisory Committee of California China Climate Institute and is also an advisory board member of the Asia Pacific Energy Research Center under APEC. The floor is yours, Dr. Zhu.
Okay, thank you, Charlie, for the introduction. And I'm very delighted today and to talk about China and what they have done in the last 5-10 years and where are they going and in the coming decades. And so without further delay, I will just start a quick presentation. Could you please proceed? So a little bit of context for China, and some of you may be very familiar with China's primary energy use, but this chart just shows you the primary energy in China in the last 40 years and how it's evolved. And as you can see, for a long time, 20 years in the beginning, and it was increasing steadily. But from 2002, and because China joined WTO and became a world factory, and it started producing consumer goods and industrial outputs for the whole world, and then you can see that primary energy use and has really skyrocketed. And that trajectory, and because of the growth rate, was unsustainable, as you can see on the left-hand side. It was growing more like 17%, 14% each year. And China, during the 11th five-year plan, started mandatory targets and a number of policies to improve energy efficiency, and also to call for structural change. And many of the policies and they implemented, combined together, slowed down the growth rate, which you see on the table. But then in the last 5-6 years, because of the economic and stimulus package and incentive for infrastructure building, and that kind of energy consumption started growing again. So particularly, and it's a good timing to revisit this issue, China is the biggest emitter and the biggest energy consumer in the world. Yesterday, you probably all heard and from this IPCC sixth assessment report, which underscored the importance and of the sense of urgency. We have to act now. we don't have to wait for another 10, 15 years to invent some game-changing technologies. And there are a lot of low-hanging fruits, mostly in the energy efficiency area, that we can implement today. So next, please. And then the next slide, it just showed that the CO2 emission and for China, which is similar, following similar trend, although it's even more serious, because most of the energy produced in China, they're from fossil fuels. Therefore, in terms of emission overall growth rate was higher. But in the last 10 years, as you can see, the growth rate slowed down, mostly contributed to renewable energy targets for power generation and decarbonization. And then also a lot of the efficiency going on in all the sectors I will quickly introduce in the following slides. Next, please. In terms of share, China and the primary energy use in the global total in 2020 is around 26%. It's compared with US, which is 16%, followed by EU 14%. But if you look at the CO2 emission, China accounts for 33%. And so again, if we want to tackle climate change, and we have to focus on the big emitters, China will be very important to look at. Okay, next, please. So the China group, we just finished this China Energy Outlook in 2022, and in which we looked at two scenarios. One is a continuous improvement scenario, which assumes all the cost-effective technologies, including efficiency technologies and practices, best design, and all these available and cost-effective measures. If we can implement it with current policy targets, overall CO2 emission can be reduced by 55%, which is showing on the right-hand side. This is already a very different picture when you compare what's like in the past 40 years, and which is a graphic on the left. And so even in this continuous improvement scenario, with current policy, it still requires a lot of effort, and in all the sectors. And for the breakout of the different sector, you will see industry, which accounts for 60–70% of the total, and will need to be reduced by half. And buildings, which is blue, and on the right hand chart, and that will be reduced by roughly 3/4. And transportation sector is one, and it's relatively remain constant. And there are a lot of efficiency improvement. However, at the same time, there will be growth in the car ownership and more turnover in the freight sector. Next, please. So we also look at the deep mitigation scenario, and in this scenario, we implement all the technology that are including the emerging technologies that are available today, and the practices including design and also and other measures we have. And when we put all these measures together, and we can see by 2050, and China will be able to reduce its CO2 emission by 3/4. And but by the end of 2050, as you can see, it's not a zero, which is what the China pledge to achieve a carbon neutrality, and at least for CO2 emissions by 2050. So by then, it will still have roughly 2 gigatons of CO2 emission left, and most of that is from industry sector, the black part. Buildings will have potential to achieve zero emission building, and transportation sector emission can be largely reduced, and due to the electrification and also many other measures that change behavior and reduce the needs for transport. Okay, next, please. And when we look at where they stand in terms of targets, and we heard earlier some of the scorecard for Europe, for US, and also the comparison. And this table summarizes some of the key indicators from China. And I just want to quickly call out some of the red fonted part, which is newly updated targets. And so China implemented energy intensity reduction target, and for the previous 5-year plans for 15%, call for 15% reduction. And then the last 5-year plan, and which ended in 2020, the actual performance was 13.3%. And so that was quite a significant reduction, although not meeting the originally planned target, and due to a number of issues, including the pandemic impact. And so going forward for the 14th 5-year plan, which they just released, and set this energy intensity target around 13.5%. It's more or less what they have achieved in the last 5 years. And another area they updated the plan includes the CO2 emission peaking, which also was China pledged for Paris Agreement. Originally, it was in the last NDCs, it called for a peaking around 2030, and make a best effort peak earlier. In the newly proposed one, and the calls for achieve the peaking before 2030. And there are other updates, for example, the carbon neutrality target, and the President Xi Jinping announced and called for a carbon neutrality before 2060. That's for all GHG emission. So for CO2 emission, that needs to achieve carbon neutral by 2050. Okay, next, please. Here are a list of policies and China just announced, or and for the 14th 5-year plan, and we don't have time to go into to elaborate on each one, but there are a number of their the policies are new compared with the previous year, which include the pilot program called for low energy and near zero energy building, and targets for pilot cities, regions, and call for electrification rate. These are new. The Green Cooling Action Plan, and enacted in 2019, and call for more stringent efficiency standards, incentive, and the retrofits. A number of very ambitious programs they have announced. For transportation sector, they're promoting a green, intelligent, and a multimodal transportation system. For industry, and the new policy include CO2 peaking and the carbon neutrality plan, and ultra low emission standards for steel, cement, and many other industry. And many of these policies and maybe tested piloting and implementing in other countries, but some of are really new, and I don't think it's been done elsewhere. Next, please. And some more summary of the key targets, and showing here as for building sector. Again, and we won't need to go into each one, but calling out some of those targets that are new. If you look at the last one, electrification rate, it was non-existent before, and now the government calls for 55% and electrification rate by 2025. We have only 3 years left. And this is a huge increase from previous years, and requires the government policies and the incentives. And also, there are targets on building efficiency, including existing building retrofit targets, including ultra low building and how many millions square meter, and they need to build ultra low building. And also there are also targets for geothermal and utilization for heating. Yeah, so in many of these areas, and for the 14th 5-year plan, and China made aggressive targets and the policy. Next, please.
Dr. Xu, I wonder if you could wrap up in about a minute. I want to make sure we give the last presenter a chance. Thank you.
Sounds good. Yeah. So And I will summarize very quickly. And then there's a number of the policies they also implemented for industry, which include supply side and national level or for sector level. And there are energy saving targets, and there are environmental protection policies, technology promotion type of incentives and financial incentives, all of those and are included. Next, please. So the last and the fourth slide, and I will summarize, keep going. And this is a new area. We want to also call for attention on the material efficiency, which has been overlooked in the past. And so keep going. And this one, it shows for building sector, the embodied emission accounts for a large portion of the total, which mostly in iron, steel, in cement, in aluminum. All these are going into the building construction, and which we need to also and pay attention to. Next, please. And here are a list of things, again, we can do, for example, to reduce the embodied emission for cement industry, whether it's managing material demand, improve efficiency, electrifying processes, and also switching it away from fossil fuels and to cleaner fuel, and including the CCUS. Okay, if you can go to next one. Okay, I will conclude with this slide and the material efficiency. When we look at the future potential reduction and compare with and other areas, we can see this material efficiency plays a large role and in terms of overall reduction potential, and followed by the energy efficiency, and also there's other fuel switching measures, and in the end there will be could be CCS and required if we want to reach carbon neutrality. Okay, yeah, with that I will conclude my presentation.
Yep. Thanks, Dr. Zhu. So next up is Helen Walters-Terranoni. Helen is the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at the Air Conditioning, Heating and Refrigeration Institute, or AHRI. At AHRI, Helen works closely with other stakeholders and uses her extensive experience to support reasonable, practicable strategies and transitions, such as through the AHRI Safe Refrigerant Transition Task Force. Before AHRI, Helen spent 7 years managing the business development of low global warming potential alternatives for installation and for use as a refrigerant, and started work in global regulatory affairs. She is currently a co-chair of the UN Montreal Protocol Foams Technical Options Committee and was a science advisor for the Alliance for Responsible Atmospheric Policy. Please take it away, Helen.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Emma, we're gonna skip some of these slides and move pretty quickly to help people maintain the schedule. You can skip this. We're gonna talk about general transitions for refrigerants and how that kind of overlays and impacts with energy efficiency. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So for those of you that are not aware, we've been through many refrigerant transitions in the air conditioning and refrigeration space. The Montreal Protocol, you may be aware, eliminated the use of ozone depleting substances through a series of regulations internationally that were agreed upon by all countries in the world. In the US, there are some specific rules in place around transitions. And then in 2016, the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, actually, there was an agreement among the nations to phase down the use of hydrofluorocarbons, which have very high global warming potentials, GWPs, so those HFCs. We're going to talk a little bit about this next transition and how that impacts energy efficiency. You can go to the next slide. Thank you, Emma. In case you're unaware, here's some of the markets where refrigerants and HFCs, hydrofluorocarbons, have been used over the years: air conditioning, refrigeration, home appliances, as well as other uses that you see here. You can go to the next slide. Thank you, Emma. So in the US has actually adopted a phase down. It's been enacted since 2020, which mandates the reduction of production and consumption of HFCs. through the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. It allows for sector transitions. So the EPA can say, you will transition to a refrigerant with a GWP under a certain level on a certain date. It also allows for requirements around recovery and reclaim and general refrigerant management practices. You can see on the right-hand side the steps down. This does align and harmonize with the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. So if we go to the next slide. So interestingly, consumption doesn't mean what you think it means. It actually means the production plus import of the HFC minus the export. You can go to the next slide. So consumption is supply, it's not demand. So that's kind of a different way to use that terminology. The next slide, thank you. So this HFC allocation phase down, it's designed to create an economic imbalance between supply and demand. We have all experienced this during the pandemic. So what happens when there is reduced supply of something? We see scarcity, and so people come up with other solutions, and we see increased prices. You can go to the next slide, thank you. So next we're going to talk a little bit about the chaos in Europe that ensued when they went through this initial steps down. You can go to the next slide. So in Europe, actually the phase down precedes the steps down required under the Kigali Amendment. And so this much faster pace, we found that end users, especially retailers, were not really prepared for this. So we're going to talk about what happened. So next slide. I mentioned before that EPA or a regulating agency can control a sector and say, you know, heat pumps shall go to a GWP less than 750 in 2025, for example. That's a possibility that we've actually petitioned US EPA for. But there were very little of these sector controls in place in Europe before the really big step down that happened in 2018. And you can go to the next slide and we'll show what happened in 2018. Basically, the price of refrigerants skyrocketed up to 900%, nearly 10 times the price that folks saw prior to the step down. So with that, and the lack of available refrigerant, it became pretty challenging to figure out how to service equipment, how to build new equipment with refrigerants. So pretty big challenges in place. The next slide. We'll talk a little bit about the US and what we're going to try to do a little bit differently here. So we've got the allocation rules, which kind of phase down the supply side of things. And there's an opportunity for us to ask EPA for these demand-based, sector-based control transitions, which we have done. We've actually at AHRI, the Air Conditioning Heat Refrigeration Institute, we've submitted a handful of petitions to EPA asking them to implement these transitions. And so, for example, as I noted, the 2025 750 GWP limit for heat pumps and air conditioning. You can go to the next slide, thank you. So some of the other things that we need to think about as we go through this transition is that more energy efficient, you know, as we continue to work on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we're certainly also continuing our journey on energy efficiency. And more energy efficient equipment can require the use of larger charge sizes of refrigerant. Heat pumps can require larger charges of heat transfer fluids than air conditioning alone. And of course, there will be many people that have heating today that don't have air conditioning that will then also need refrigerant charge that didn't need it yesterday. So all of these things we need to think about as we think about the transition to a lower carbon footprint and more energy efficient equipment. On the plus side of this is that some of these lower global warming potential refrigerants typically require smaller charge sizes. And I would mention Australia is really leading the way around the world on this, really leading the way. They have moved quite a long way in their journey to the adoption of low GWP refrigerants. And they've kind of documented this reduction in charge size. So all of this makes balancing supply and demand more critical as we look at energy efficiency increases and charge size reduction needs. You can go to the next slide, Emma.
And actually, Helen, I think I've cut you off because I don't know if the chat room is going to shut off right at noon, but I think it may.
Okay.
So
okay.
I appreciate you doing the presentation, and everyone should know presentations are available, and we won't get to the Q&A, but if it's okay, you can reach out to the presenters with your questions, and we have a record of those questions as well, and we can provide those to the presenters. And I want to thank all the presenters for being here and putting together the presentations and making themselves available. We really appreciate your efforts here, and hopefully we've found some good best practices and policies moving forward. And so with that, again, I'm not sure when this chat room gets shut down. I don't know if it happens right at noon and my clock just turned over. So again, thanks to everybody who attended, and thanks to all the participants who presented. Appreciate it.
Thank you.